Hi, welcome to the sixth class of TSD Mindfulness. I'm so glad you're here. We've got a great class for you tonight. I think that you're going to enjoy and get a lot out of the teachings tonight. Let's do a review first from the last class. In the last class, we talked about the gut and the heart fields in more detail. The gut field responds in a binary way, either contentment because all is preserved, or discomfort because certain aspects of your life are at risk for changing. The gut field can be associated with instinct, but what separates instinct from thought is that instinct is something that we are born with, as opposed to something that we learn during our life. However, the gut field often responds as a result of your life experience. So the gut field is not confined to instinct. The gut field does not respond well to our practice of focusing on sights, sounds, and physical sensations. So this is our typical mindfulness practice. The gut does not respond well to a typical mindfulness practice. Instead, the gut responds well to reassurance, which we talked a lot about last time. It is also important to note that the gut field drives our behavior and our relationships with the people and the things in our life, just like the mental field does. So it's just as instrumental in creating and maintaining and affecting our relationships in our lives. So that's why with the TSD mindfulness, we also really focus a lot on the gut field, not just the mind or the mental field. I offered a metaphor last class for the temperamental body. It's a seesaw. The mental field and the gut field are at either end of the seesaw, and they work together in tandem, pulling us between stimulate change, analyze outcomes, put plans into action. So this is the mental field. And at the other end of the continuum, at the other end of the seesaw, is keep everything in your life exactly as it is right now. Don't change a thing. That's the gut field. In the middle of our temperamental body is the pivot point, representing the heart. In the middle of our seesaw is the pivot point, representing our heart, and is where the crux of our experience is. So when we tame our mental field and we soothe our gut field on the other end of the seesaw, then we balance the seesaw and we make it possible for us to move into our hearts. And in the heart exists the reality of our experience. This is where old pain resides and true joy. It's all there in the heart. So tonight we're going to discuss all three items on the list called the desires of the temperamental body. The first item on that list of the desires of the temperamental body is the mental field desires change. So that's where we're going to start tonight. The mental field desires change because of free will and the ego. If it were not for change, there would be no options in our lives, and there would be no need for free will or the ego or the mental field for that matter. So the mental field likes change because it gives itself purpose. Specifically, the mental field wants the ability to make a decision, and decisions usually end in some kind of change. Not all the time, but sometimes. The mental field would have no purpose if it were not for change and making decisions, because the mental field analyzes options, reflects on the past, makes projections about the future. It's also creative. So let us be grateful that coupled with our free will, we are also born with this mental field that helps support us to use that will. So not only does the mental field desire change, it also has a wealth of tools at its disposal to institute change. So I'll say that again. Not only does the mental field desire change, it has a wealth of tools at its disposal to institute change. So let's look at the world and what's going on in the world to understand this better. If a large corporation sets out to make a change, it must rely on several different groups of people to guide them through this change. There's a group who analyzes historical data to assess how to go forward. More people make judgments and decisions about whether or not outcomes will be beneficial. And still other people use creativity to develop ideas not yet researched or analyzed or tested. Risk assessment is involved, as well as financial analysis and resource management. So there's all of these like analytical type things going on. So this corporation's powerhouse, right, of men and women and the technology that they use is a wonderful outwardly projection of what our mental field does when we entertain change in our own lives. So you maybe already see things like this, and definitely if you start practicing TSD mindfulness, I think you'll see things like this, how things in our world are kind of mirrors or projections of what's going on in our own system. It's these outwardly projections. The mental field reflects on the past and projects into the future and simulates outcomes and makes judgments about risks and rewards, as well as uses creativity to conceptualize designs never thought of before. So this is drawing this parallel between, what this process that a big corporation might go through and then our mental field, having those same processes going on. For example, if you are considering moving into a new home, and you will reflect on the homes that you've lived in the past, and consider what you've liked and disliked about them, and then you will consider different options for your new home. And you might also use creativity to open yourself up to a new type of living situation. All right, so that's an example of that process, that the mental fields process. Either way, risks will be assessed and so forth, and this process might not be entirely conscious, but you are using your mental field to some degree. Some of you might rely less on your mental field and more on your gut field or even your heart field when you make these decisions. But if you're someone that relies a lot on your logic and these reasoning processes, then a lot of this decision making happens in your mental field. Despite all the benefits of using your mental field, when you practice TSD mindfulness, you actually want to quiet this powerhouse, taking a break from this powerhouse temporarily. So that's part of the practice of TSD mindfulness, and actually the practice of most of mindfulness, traditional mindfulness. The reason is that this powerhouse of reflection and simulation and projections distracts us from what's going on in our gut field and our heart field. So that's why we need to quiet, tame this powerhouse so we can focus a little bit more on our gut field and our heart field. The mental field is fixated on what we are doing, opposed to how we are doing it. However, when the mental field does this, it kind of misses the point because much of the time, not all the time, but much of the time, it is not as important what we are doing, but how we are doing it. So that's another tidbit of information to understand about the mental field and how it can get us caught up and how we need to quiet it down for this mindfulness practice. So moving into the heart helps us be conscious of how we are doing what we're doing. The heart is more about how we are doing as opposed to simply what we are doing. So that's another huge important outcome of this practice, is moving into that more focusing of how we are doing what we're doing instead of what we are doing necessarily. And since the mental field is very much associated with will, it is in our best interest to use will to quiet our mental field. If not, our will naturally migrate us, push us into activities associated with change. So I'll say that again. Since the mental field is very much associated with will, it really helps to use will to quiet our mental field. Because if we don't, then the mental field will naturally migrate to some of these processes around making decisions and change and things like that. All right, so we're going to go ahead and move on to talking about the gut field. So that second item on the list of the desires of the temperamental body is the gut field desires preservation. This is quite the opposite, right, of the mental field, which desires change. The gut field desires preservation first and foremost to keep us alive. It is the gut field's primary purpose to keep us alive. You know that the gut field is working if you observe an animal fighting for its life. So what's going on in that circumstance is the gut field has taken over the temperamental body system, right, and is making it so we survive. So if a frog will climb out of a container, a bird will feed itself, a squirrel will flee from a predator, and these creatures are receiving impulses from their gut field telling them to do whatever is in their power to stay alive. So that's the first and foremost um, desire, I guess is the way to look at it, of the gut field. Interestingly, all vertebrates have a gut field, and some animals have a heart field, and a smaller number of animals have a mental field as well. So you can figure this out by looking at the brain of these animals. For example, a fish has a reptilian complex and a limbic system, but no neocortex. So this indicates that the fish has a gut field and it has a heart field, but it doesn't have a mental field necessarily. There are some other situations that the gut field likes to preserve. All right, it's not just our life. Someone else's life, that would be another example. If you have someone close to you fighting for their own life and their survival, then your gut field is going to really perk up in those situations as well. Our gut field is also interested in our emotional survival. If our gut field senses a situation in which we might become emotionally devastated, it will react with a hard no, like, no, cut it off. No, we cannot be emotionally devastated. It wants to preserve status quo. It's really about the status quo, just preserving everything the way it is. If we have an emotional devastation or emotional hiccup even, the gut field will respond to that. The gut field is also interested in preserving the ego and therefore will react if your ego is threatened in some way. But here's the thing, emotional and egotistical survival are not always in your best interest. Actually, in some situations, emotional devastation or an emotional hiccup and ego deflation are actually important to moving into perfect relationship. So the TSD mindfulness is really centered around this idea of moving into these perfect relationships. And someday, physical death will be important to moving into perfect relationships. So I'll kind of say that again. These survivals, right, that the gut is like really into, like this physical survival, this emotional survival, this egotistical survival, it's not always in our best interest. So, these kind of like getting deflated, your ego getting deflated, or an emotional kind of like turned down, and sometimes those are big growing moments when we just kind of like go into this emotional downturn and then we come back out like this brand new person, like this butterfly coming out of the cocoon, right? So it's important to realize this, that even though this is how our gut feel is set up and it desires this preservation, that preservation is not always what we need to move into perfect relationship. Therefore, it's important that we know how to soothe our guts using TSD mindfulness. Moreover, our gut's reaction to loss of preservation distracts us from our heart field. It makes it difficult or impossible for us to dwell in our heart. So soothing the gut's fear of this change is key to TSD mindfulness practice. All right, so the heart field, the third item on the list of the desires of the temperamental body is the heart field desires consideration. This isn't consideration like, I'm going to spend some time and really think about this and ponder it. Not that kind of consideration. Consideration as in devout and steady observation. Devout and steady observation. That's it. That's all the heart field really needs from us, is just to be there and to observe in this really devout way, in this steady way. The heart field is our rock. It is the reality of who we are. It does not ask for much, yet at the same time, we do not have great influence over what is in the heart. The heart field only desires us to move our consciousness into it and consider what is there. So I'll say that again. The heart field, although it doesn't need a lot from us, there isn't a lot that we can do to influence the heart. And so we really need to surrender. There's a lot of surrender involved in there. So the heart field only desires us to move our consciousness into it and consider what is there. The heart field desires consideration because your attention in the heart instigates the healing process and the joyful experience. So the healing process and the joyful experience are these two things that we experience that our heart and our soul really want us to experience. And so we can do that when we tame the mind, tame the mental field, soothe the gut, and move into our heart. If you've already done a lot of healing work and are free from trauma, then the joyful experience will be more of your process. So I want to say that because you might have been doing lots of healing work and you're at this point where you're like, I'm complete with that. I don't need to start doing all this healing work again. And that's fine. It doesn't mean if you start practicing TSD mindfulness, you're all of a sudden going to have to go back and do all this healing work. So I wanted to mention that. The healing process and joyful experience leads us to a true sense of purpose, connection, and fulfillment. So the joyful experience and the healing process leads us to a true sense of purpose, connection, fulfillment, and actually I'll mention energy, just feeling energetic. So we cannot fully see what is in the heart until we move our consciousness into the heart. And so that becomes really important. For example, there's something called heart fatigue. It's when our heart field is just tired. And we can't really see that until we get into the heart and observe that. So we're dwelling in the heart. So what happens with this heart fatigue is the heart field often gets tired, which in turn leaves us feeling drained. The heart field is tired because it's not relying on divine flow. So instead of relying on divine flow, we are relying on our mental field and our gut field a little bit too much. And so it's what it ends up happening that ends up really tiring our heart field. But if we can rely more on divine flow, it kind of frees us up a little bit, frees up our mental field, frees up our gut field, opens our heart more, and we won't experience as much of that heart fatigue. It can be really life-changing that within itself. So this all takes a toll on our temperamental bodies, especially your hearts, and we need to rely more on divine flow so we do not become fatigued energetically, physically, emotionally, and intellectually. The remedy for this exhaustion is surrender in our hearts, which is not possible without our devout and steady attention within the heart field. So the remedy for this exhaustion is just surrendering in our heart by using that devout and steady attention, which is all that our heart wants from us, is that devout and steady attention within our heart. We can't really do that until we tame this thing and we soothe our gut. And we cannot become attentive in our hearts until we move our consciousness into our heart fields. And this movement requires us first to tame our mental field and soothe our gut fields. And this practice takes a sense of worthiness because it's also important. This worthiness is important because dedicating a portion of your day to simply moving your attention into your heart and observing, it's kind of luxurious, right? It seems luxurious to just take time out of your day to simply move your attention into your heart. But the reality is, it's not beyond reach. It could become very routine. It could become as routine as brushing your teeth and as necessary as brushing your teeth. I think when you start doing the practice and start experiencing the benefits of it, you'll see that maybe this isn't so luxurious. This is like really important and like for your survival. So you can do the TSD challenge and see how that goes. Future teachings of TSD mindfulness will offer a thorough explanation of surrendering in the heart and how to instigate this healing process and this joyful experience. All right, so we're ready to go and talk about the meditation and move on to that segment of our class tonight. So let's review a little bit about what we talked about last class about the meditation. We talked about will last time and how to use will in our TSD mindfulness practice. We have will, we have free will. Let's use it to our advantage. We need to use it. We have it, we need to use it. And so let's talk about how we use that to our